Redemption, Arizona Territory. 1889. The cell was small, 8 feet by 8 feet of stone and iron with a single barred window that let in the cold desert moonlight. The kind of cell where men spent their last night on earth. Tommy Blackwood sat on the thin cot, his hands clasped between his knees. 19 years old. Tomorrow morning he would hang. The door at the end of the corridor creaked open. Footsteps. Slow, measured, deliberative. A woman appeared in the torchlight. She wore the black habit of a nun, but she moved like someone who had spent years on horseback. Her hair, what little showed beneath her wimple, was silver white. Her eyes were gray and sharp as flint. "You're the one they call Mother Agnes," Tommy said. It wasn't a question. "I am. The sheriff said you wanted to see me, said you've been visiting condemned men for years." Tommy laughed hollow and bitter. "Come to save my soul before they stretch my neck." Agnes pulled a wooden stool from the corner and sat down across from the bars. She studied him for a long moment, his defiant mom, his frightened eyes, the way his fingers trembled, no matter how still he tried to hold them. "You remind me of someone," she said quietly. "Yeah, who's that?" "A boy I once knew, a boy I saved, a boy I failed." Tommy frowned. "That don't make sense." "No, I suppose it doesn't." Agnes folded her hands in her lap. "You asked me a question when I first wrote to you. You asked why I believe you can still change even now, even with the noose waiting. You never answered. Because the answer isn't simple. It isn't quick." She leaned forward slightly. "But we have all night, Thomas, and I have a story to tell you. A story about a boy named Daniel Crow and the man he became." Tommy's eyes flickered. Even in a town like Redemption, everyone had heard of Daniel Crow. The Devil's Hand? Why, the most feared outlaw the Arizona Territory had ever seen. "What's Daniel Crow got to do with me?" Agnes smiled, but there was no warmth in it, only old pain weathered by time. "Everything," she said, "because 30 years ago I found him the same way someone found you, starving, angry, alone. I took him in, I raised him, I taught him everything I knew." She paused. "And then I abandoned him, and he became a monster. So what you're saying, I'm going to become a monster too?" "No." Agnes shook her head slowly. "I'm saying you have a choice, the same choice Daniel had, the same choice we all have right up until our final breath." She reached through the bars and gripped his hand. Her palm was rough with calluses, not the hands of a woman who had spent her life in prayer. "Let me tell you about the day the devil came to Silver Creek. Let me tell you about the bush I loved, the man I hunted, and the choice that nearly killed us both." Tommy stared at her. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance. "All right," he whispered. "Tell me." Agnes closed her eyes and remembered. Silver Creek, Arizona Territory. October 1887. The funeral was supposed to be quiet. Marshal William Tucker had served Silver Creek for 11 years. He had kept the peace through droughts and range wars, through diphtheria outbreaks and Comanche raids. He had been a good man, stern, but fair, the kind of lawman who knew every family in town by name. 3 days ago, Daniel Crow had shot him dead in the middle of Main Street. No warning, no provocation, just a single bullet through the heart while Tucker was walking to his office. Now the whole town gathered at the cemetery on the hill, and the autumn wind carried the smell of dust and sage across the mourners. Father Miguel read from his Bible, his voice thin and reedy against the gusts. Martha Tucker wept into her handkerchief. Her 2 sons stood rigid beside her, their faces blank with shock. Agnes McBride stood at the back of the crowd. She was 63 years old, tall and straight-backed despite her age. She wore the simple black habit of the Sisters of Santa Maria, but there was nothing soft about her. Her jaw was set like granite. Her gray eyes swept the horizon with the practiced vigilance of someone who had spent decades watching for trouble. Beside her, Sister Ruth Brennan fidgeted nervously. "Mother, perhaps we should go," Ruth whispered. "The crow's nest, they could be anywhere." Agnes didn't answer. She was staring at the ridgeline to the north. Father Miguel's voice droned on. "Yo, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you will fear no evil." And then she heard it. Hoofbeats, distant at first, a low rumble like summer thunder, but growing closer. Others heard it too. Heads turned, conversations died. Martha Tucker's sobs caught in her throat. On the northern ridge, silhouettes appeared against the pale October sky. 12 riders. They sat motionless on their horses arranged in a perfect line along the crest of the hill. The wind snapped at their dusters. Rifle barrels glinted in the afternoon light. No one in the cemetery moved. The rider at the center urged his horse forward. Just a few steps, just enough to separate himself from the others. He was tall and lean, dressed entirely in black. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face. Even at this distance, Agnes could see the scar that ran from his jaw down into his collar, a twisted rope of pale flesh against sun-darkened skin. Daniel Crow, the devil's hand. He raised one gloved hand not to draw a weapon, but to remove his hat. He held it against his chest in a mock gesture of respect, bowing his head toward the grave. The message was clear. I killed your marshal. I'm here at his funeral, and there's nothing any of you can do about it. Sheriff Marcus Cole's hand drifted toward his holster. Agnes saw it. She also saw the way his fingers trembled, the way his shoulders slumped with exhaustion and defeat. Cole was 55, a former Texas Ranger, but the years had worn him down to bone and regret. He didn't draw. No one drew. Daniel Crow put his hat back on. He turned his horse. And then his voice rang out across the valley, clear and cold, as mountain snow. 3 days. The words hung in the air. 3 days to clear out. Every man, woman, and child. After that, Silver Creek belongs to me. He wheeled his horse and rode back toward his men. The 12 riders turned as one and vanished over the ridge. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Martha Tucker began to scream. Agnes remained at the cemetery long after the others had gone. She stood at the edge of the ridge, staring out at the desert. The sun was sinking toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Behind her, the gravediggers finished their work, the scrape of their shovels, the only sound in the stillness. 23 years. 23 years since she had last seen Daniel Crow. He had been 15 then, still a boy, still the bright-eyed child she had raised and loved and taught, still wearing the wooden cross she had carved for him with her own hands. Now he was a monster, a killer, the most wanted man in the territory, and I made him. Mother Agnes, she turned. Father Miguel stood a few paces away, his weathered face creased with concern. The others have gone to the church, he said. There's talk of leaving. The Morrison family is already packing their wagon. They're afraid. Maggie Chen, the widow who ran the general store, sat with her daughter, both of them pale and silent. And in the center of it all, the voices of fear. We can't fight 30 men. The marshal tried, and look what happened to him. My children, I won't risk my children. Where are we supposed to go? We have nowhere. Ruth was standing near the side door, her jaw tight with barely contained frustration. When she saw Agnes enter, she pushed through the crowd to reach her. They've been at it for an hour, Ruth murmured. Half of them want to run, the other half want to fight, and nobody has a real plan for either. Agnes said nothing. She walked down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing against the stone floor. One by one, the voices fell silent. By the time she reached the altar, every eye was on her. Sheriff Cole shifted uncomfortably. Mother Agnes, we were just... I heard. Agnes turned to face the congregation. I heard the fear. I heard the anger. What I haven't heard is faith. A man near the back, Tom Brennan Ruth's older brother, a rancher with sun-leathered skin, stood up abruptly. Faith, he laughed bitterly. Faith won't stop bullets, Mother. Faith didn't save Marshal Tucker. No, it didn't. Agnes met his eyes steadily. But running won't save you either. Daniel Crow has men watching every road out of town. How long do you think you'll get before they ride you down? Silence. He gave us 3 days, Agnes continued. Not because he's merciful, because he wants us to run. He wants us to scatter like rabbits so he can hunt us at his leisure. She paused. The moment you flee, you're dead. Then what do you suggest? Maggie Chen asked quietly. We're not fighters, Mother. We're shopkeepers and farmers, and I'm not asking you to fight. Then what are you asking? Agnes took a breath. Careful now. Choose your words. I'm asking you to trust me. Give me 3 days. If I can't find a way to end this peacefully, then you can leave. But if you run now, he wins, and Silver Creek dies. Cole stepped forward. Mother Agnes, I respect you. We all do. But what exactly are you planning to do against 30 armed killers? Agnes looked at him. this tired, broken man who had once ridden with legends, who had once been a force to be reckoned with across the whole of Texas. "I'm going to talk to him," she said. The room erupted. "She's mad. Talk to the devil's hand. He'll kill her on sight," Agnes let them shout. She let the fear and disbelief wash over her like a wave breaking against stone. When the noise finally subsided, she spoke again, her voice low but carrying. "I knew Daniel Crow before he was the devil's hand, before he was a killer." She touched the plain wooden cross at her throat. "I raised him. He was mine." Dead silence. Even the wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Ruth stared at her, eyes wide. "Mother, you never said." "Because it wasn't something I could speak of." Agnes's voice remained steady, but something flickered in her eyes, something old and wounded. "I found him when he was 8 years old, starving alone trying to steal bread from my wagon. I took him in, trained him, loved him like a son." "What happened?" Maggie whispered. "I left him." The words came out flat, affectless, like a doctor describing a patient's symptoms. "I thought I was doing God's work. I thought he was old enough to take care of himself. I was wrong." Father Miguel crossed himself. "You mean to redeem him, after everything he's done?" "I mean to try." Agnes looked around the room at the frightened faces, the desperate eyes, the children clinging to their mother's skirts. "You don't have to believe it's possible. You just have to give me 3 days." The silence stretched. Then slowly Tom Brennan sat back down. Maggie Chen nodded once. Others followed one by one until the whole congregation had settled into an uneasy stillness. Sheriff Cole sighed heavily. 3 days, Mother. But if he kills you, we run. Understood? Understood. That night, Agnes sat alone in her small room at the convent. The Santa Maria Mission perched on a hillside 2 miles outside Silver Creek, overlooking the desert like a sentinel. It was a modest place, 6 nuns, a small chapel, and a schoolhouse that had once served the children of the region. Now the schoolhouse stood empty. The children had been kept home for weeks, their parents too frightened to let them venture out. Agnes lit a candle and knelt beside her bed. From beneath the mattress, she pulled a wooden box, plain, unvarnished, no bigger than a loaf of bread. Inside lay 2 Colt peacemakers. The bluing had worn away in places, but the steel was clean and oiled. She had maintained them religiously for 30 years, though she had sworn never to touch them again. Also in the box, a photograph yellowed with age. A younger Agnes, perhaps 35, standing beside a boy of 15. He was grinning at the camera, his eyes bright with mischief and joy. She had her hand on his shoulder. Daniel, before the fire, before the scar, before everything. And beneath the photograph, a letter, still sealed. The paper brittle, the ink faded to brown. Agnes picked up the letter with trembling fingers. She had received it 20 years ago. 1867. Sent from a town called Dry Springs, forwarded 3 times before it finally reached her in Mexico. She had never opened it. At first she told herself it was because she was too busy with her missionary work. Then she told herself it was because too much time had passed, that responding would only open old wounds. And finally she stopped making excuses and simply didn't think about it. Cowardice, she thought now. That's what it was, plain and simple. She broke the seal. The paper crinkled as she unfolded it. The handwriting was uneven. The letters of a boy who had never had proper schooling, who had learned to write from a woman who herself had barely finished 3rd grade. Ma, Agnes, why did you go? Why didn't you say nothing the night you left the barn, caught fire? I was sleeping in the hay like always. I tried to get out, but the door was stuck, and the smoke was so thick I couldn't see nothing. I got out through the window, but the fire got me. My neck and my shoulder. Doc says the scars won't never go away. Nobody came to help. Nobody came to find me after. I waited for you for 3 days, Ma. 3 days sitting on the road watching for your wagon. You never came back. I ain't angry. I just want to know why. What did I do wrong? I still wear the cross you made me. I'll wear it till I die. Your boy Daniel." The candle flame guttered. Agnes realized that tears were falling onto the paper, smudging the ancient ink. "I didn't know. I didn't know about the fire. I didn't know he was hurt. I didn't know he waited. And I never even opened the letter." 20 years, she whispered into the darkness. "You waited 20 years for an answer, and I never gave you one." She pressed the letter to her chest and wept. Tommy, the young man startled. He had been listening with such intensity that he'd forgotten where he was, forgotten the bars between them, forgotten the noose waiting in the morning. You, you never opened it, he asked. Not once in 20 years. Not once, Agnes's voice was heavy with old shame. I told myself it was kinder that way, that Daniel had surely moved on, found a new life forgotten about the woman who raised him. But the truth was simpler and uglier than that. What truth? That I was afraid, afraid of what the letter might say, afraid of what I might have done to him by leaving. She shook her head slowly. Fear makes cowards of us all, Thomas. Remember that. Not the fear of dying that's natural, that's human, but the fear of facing our own sins. That's the fear that destroys us. Tommy was quiet for a moment. But you opened it eventually. You faced it. Yes, when Daniel came back to Silver Creek, when I saw him on that ridge wearing black like death himself, calling himself the devil's hand. Agnes closed her eyes. I finally opened the letter, and I finally understood what I had done. What did you do after you read it, I mean? Agnes's weathered face hardened with something that might have been determination or might have been grief. I made a choice, she said, the hardest choice of my life. The second day dawned gray and cold. Agnes rose before the other sisters dressed in the dark and slipped out of the convent, while the desert sky was still stained with the last colors of night. She saddled her horse, a dappled gray mare named Ruth, after her closest friend, and rode into Silver Creek. The town felt like a ghost of itself. Shutters were closed, doors were barred. The few people on the street moved quickly, their eyes darting to the hills as if expecting riders to appear at any moment. She found Sheriff Cole outside his office, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. You're early, he said by way of greeting. I need information, Marcus, everything you know about Daniel Crow, where he's been, what he's done, who he rides with. Cole sighed heavily. Sit down, Agnes. This isn't going to be pleasant. She sat on the wooden bench beside him. The morning light was pale and thin, turning the desert a washed-out shade of gold. Daniel Crow first appeared about 10 years ago, Cole began. Started out as a hired gun for the cattle barons up north. Earned a reputation for being fast and accurate and utterly without mercy. They called him the Devil's Hand because he could draw with either hand, both at once if he wanted. He paused. They say he never misses. I taught him that, Agnes thought. I taught him to shoot with both hands because I shot with both hands. After a few years, he went independent. Started his own gang, the Crow's Nest. 30 men, give or take. They hit stagecoaches, banks, payroll shipments. No job too dangerous, no target too well guarded. Cole's jaw tightened. They've killed at least 40 men in the last 5 years, probably more. And the law hasn't stopped him. The law has tried. There's a $5,000 bounty on his head. 3 marshals have gone after him. Cole looked at her. 3 marshals are buried in Boot Hill. Agnes absorbed this in silence. 40 men dead, perhaps more. My boy, my Daniel. What else, she asked. There's a man who rides at his right hand, Elijah Stone. Older fellow, maybe 50. He was a horse thief and murderer back before Daniel found him. Some say Stone's the real brains of the operation, that Daniel's just the gun. Cole shook his head. But I don't believe that. I've seen Daniel give orders. He's not following anyone. Stone, Agnes repeated. Tell me about him. Mina's a rattlesnake and twice as patient. He's been with Daniel since the beginning, since before Daniel even had a gang. Some say Stone was the one who found Daniel after... Cole hesitated. After what? After some kind of accident? A fire, maybe. Daniel's got scars all down his neck and shoulder. Stone supposedly nursed him back to health, trained him, made him into what he is. Agnes felt something cold settle in her stomach. The night you left the barn caught fire. She had assumed the fire was an accident. But what if it wasn't? What if someone had set that fire deliberately and then rescued the survivor Stone? Where did Stone come from, she asked. Before Daniel. Nobody knows for sure. Some say he was a hired killer in California. Others say he rode with Quantrill during the war. Cole shrugged. What I do know is that he hates anything to do with church and faith. He once burned a mission in New Mexico, killed the priest and 3 nuns. Agnes's hands clenched in her lap. "I need to see Daniel," she said quietly. "Alone." Cole stared at her. "That's suicide." "Maybe, but it's the only chance Silver Creek has." Before Cole could respond, a sound split the morning air. Distant but unmistakable. A gunshot. They found Frank Morrison in the middle of Main Street. He was alive, but barely. The bullet had torn through his left thigh, shattering the bone. His wife knelt beside him, pressing her shawl against the wound while blood pooled beneath him on the packed dirt. A crowd had gathered, or what passed for a crowd in a half-empty town. Doc Hartley pushed through his medical bag, clutched in unsteady hands. Despite the tremor in his fingers, his movements were precise as he assessed the wound. "He'll live," Hartley grunted, "but he'll never walk right again." Agnes looked at Morrison's chest. Pinned to his shirt with a 6-inch blade was a folded piece of paper. She pulled it free and read aloud. "You tried to run Frank. That was a mistake. Next time I aim higher." "Disarm," the crowd muttered. Someone cursed. A woman began to cry. Agnes looked up toward the hills to the north, and she saw him, a single rider silhouetted against the morning sky. Too far away to see his face, but Agnes knew him anyway. She would have known him in complete darkness, known him by the way he sat his horse, by the set of his shoulders, by some instinct deeper than sight or sound. Daniel. For a long moment they stared at each other across the distance. 500 yards of empty desert, 2 decades of silence, and all the weight of everything that had gone wrong between them. Then Daniel raised his hand, not to wave, not to threaten. He touched his chest, the place where beneath his black coat a wooden cross would hang. He still wears it. Agnes felt something crack inside her, something she had kept frozen for 20 years. "He still wears the cross I made him." Daniel turned his horse and vanished over the ridge. Agnes stood motionless in the bloody street, the note still clutched in her hand. "He's not gone, not completely. There's still something left of the boy I raised." And in that moment, she made her decision. The convent's chapel was cold and dark. Agnes knelt before the altar, but she did not pray. The candles had burned low, their flames guttering in the draft from the ill-fitted windows. Outside, the wind moaned through the courtyard like a soul in torment. What am I supposed to do? She had spent 30 years serving God, 30 years of prayer and penance, of teaching and healing, of trying to atone for the violent woman she had once been. She had put away her guns. She had taken vows. She had become someone new. But now the past had come calling, and she could not escape it. Daniel is a murderer, a monster. Everything I taught him, everything good I tried to give him, he twisted into something terrible. But he still wears the cross. The door behind her creaked open. Footsteps approached. "I knew I'd find you here." Ruth settled onto the pew beside her, and in the candlelight her face looked older, wearier. She had been Agnes's closest friend for 15 years, her confidant, her voice of reason. "I heard what happened in town," Ruth said. "Frank Morrison, the note." "Yes." "The others are terrified. Sister Mary is packing a bag. Sister Catherine wants to take the children's books to Tucson, as if we'll ever have students again." Ruth paused. "They're saying you saw him, Daniel Crow, that you looked at each other across the whole town." "We did." And Agnes was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "He touched his heart, where the cross would be." She closed her eyes. "He still wears it, Ruth, after everything. He still wears the cross I made him." "That doesn't mean—" "I know what it means." Agnes's voice sharpened. "I know it doesn't undo the murders, the robberies, the terror he's inflicted on innocent people. I know one symbol doesn't erase years of evil." "Then what does it mean?" Agnes turned to look at her friend. In the dim light, her gray eyes glittered with something fierce and desperate. "It means there's still a part of him that wants to be saved." Ruth shook her head slowly. "Mother, Agnes, I love you. I have followed you through drought and disease, through every hardship this land has thrown at us. But this," she spread her hands helplessly, "this is madness. Daniel Crow is not a lost lamb waiting to be found. He's a wolf, and wolves eat shepherds. I know what he is. I know what he's become." Agnes gripped Ruth's hands. "But I also know what I made him. When I left, when I abandoned him, I broke something inside that boy, and Stone found him. Stone took that broken thing and shaped it into a weapon. You can't blame yourself for... Can I? Agnes's voice cracked. I raised him, Ruth. I taught him to shoot, to track, to survive. I taught him that strength was the only thing that mattered in this world, and then I left him alone when he needed me most. She released Ruth's hands and stood pacing before the altar. Do you know what I was before I came here, before I became a nun? Agnes asked. They called me the shepherd, not because I was gentle, because I protected my flock and I killed anyone who threatened them. Ruth stared at her. You never told me. I never told anyone. I wanted that woman to be dead. I wanted to believe that Sister Agnes was all that remained. She laughed bitterly. But the shepherd is still here. She never left. She was just sleeping. What are you saying? Agnes walked to the corner of the chapel where a plain wooden box sat on a shelf. She hadn't touched it in months, hadn't even looked at it. Now she picked it up and carried it to the altar. I'm saying that there are two ways this can end. She opened the box. Inside, the twin colts gleamed in the candlelight. I can pray that God will soften Daniel's heart, that some miracle will occur, and he'll right away leave Silver Creek in peace, repent of his sins. She picked up one of the pistols. The weight was familiar, natural, like greeting an old friend. Or I can go to him, face him, speak to him in the only language he still understands. She met Ruth's eyes. Not to kill him, I won't do that, but to show him that I'm not afraid, that I haven't forgotten him, that I'm finally willing to answer the letter I ignored for 20 years. And if he kills you, then I die trying to save my son. Agnes's voice was steady now, clear and calm. Better that than living as a coward who abandoned him twice. Ruth was silent for a long moment. Tears glistened on her cheeks. You're not a coward, she said finally. You never were. I was, but not anymore. Agnes slid the pistol into her belt and closed the box. Tomorrow morning, I ride to find Daniel Crow. If I'm not back by sunset, take the sisters and go. Don't look back. Agnes, promise me. Ruth wiped her eyes. Then slowly she nodded. I promise. The candle on Agnes's side of the bars had burned low. Tommy sat pressed against the iron grating, his face pale in the flickering light. That was the moment, Agnes said quietly. Not when I picked up the guns, not when I read the letter, but when I made Ruth promise to leave without me. She paused. That was when I finally accepted that I might die and that it might be worth it. But you didn't die, Tommy said. You're here telling me this story. No, I didn't die, but plenty of others did before the end. Agnes's voice grew heavy. And Daniel had choices to make too. Choices I couldn't make for him. Choices no one could make for him. What kind of choices? Agnes looked at him through the bars. In the torchlight, her eyes seemed to hold entire worlds of sorrow and hard-won wisdom. The choice between who we've been and who we could become. The choice between the easy path and the right one. The choice between holding on to hate and letting it go. She stood, her joints creaking with age and old injuries. That's enough for tonight. You should rest. Tomorrow comes early. Wait, Tommy gripped the bars. You can't stop there. What happened? Did you find him? I found him. Agnes moved toward the door. And what happened after? Well, that's a story for the next few hours. Get some sleep, Thomas. Dream of who you want to be, not who you've been. She paused at the door and looked back. Because when the sun rises, you'll have to make a choice too. The same choice Daniel made. The same choice we all make in the end. What choice is that? Agnes smiled a sad, ancient smile. Whether the darkness inside us is all we are, or whether there's still a light worth fighting for. She slipped out the door, leaving Tommy alone with the shadows and the weight of everything he had heard. Redemption, Arizona territory. 1889. Tommy Blackwood couldn't sleep. He lay on the thin cot, staring at the ceiling of his cell, listening to the wind howl outside. The moon had shifted since Mother Agnes left its pale light, now slanting through the barred window at a different angle. Time was passing. Dawn was coming, and with it, the noose. The corridor door creaked open again. Footsteps approached the same slow, measured pace as before. You came back, Tommy said, sitting up. Agnes settled onto her stool, a tin cup of water in her weathered hands. She looked tired, but her eyes were still sharp, still piercing. I told you we had all night. She took a sip. Did you rest? Couldn't. Kept thinking about what you said, about the letter, about the fire. Tommy gripped the bars, about the choice. And I still don't understand. You found Daniel, you went to talk to him, but you said people died. You said, he swallowed. You said things got worse before they got better. Much worse. Agnes set down her cup. The morning I rode out to find Daniel, I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought my faith in my guns would be enough. She shook her head slowly. I was wrong. I underestimated how deep his pain ran. And I underestimated the man who had been feeding that pain for 23 years. Stone. Yes, Elijah Stone. Agnes's voice hardened. The devil on Daniel's shoulder. The man who had raised him in my absence, not with love, but with hate. Not with hope, but with violence. She paused. Stone didn't want Daniel to be saved. Stone needed Daniel to be a monster. Because without Daniel, Stone was nothing. Tommy leaned forward. What happened when you found him, Daniel, I mean? What did he say? Agnes closed her eyes. The wind rattled the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. He said the one thing I couldn't answer, she whispered. He asked me why I left. And for the first time in 30 years, I had no words. Silver Creek, Arizona Territory. October 1887. Day 3. The morning sun rose blood red over the desert. Agnes stood in the doorway of the convent, dressed not in her habit, but in the clothes of her former life. A plain cotton shirt tucked into dust-colored trousers, boots worn soft by years of riding, a wide-brimmed hat that had once kept the sun from her eyes on 100 wagon trails, and at her hips the twin Colts. Ruth watched from the steps, her face pale. You look like someone else. I am someone else. Agnes checked the cylinders of her pistols, 6 rounds each, oiled and clean. I'm who I was before I came here. Before I put on the habit and swore never to kill again. And now, Agnes holstered the guns. Now I pray I won't have to break that vow. She walked to her horse. The gray mare stood saddled and ready, ears pricked toward the distant hills. The other sisters had gathered in the courtyard, their faces a mixture of fear and awe. Sister Mary clutched her rosary. Sister Catherine wept silently. If I don't return by 3 o'clock, Agnes said to Ruth, take the sisters and ride for Tucson. Don't stop. Don't look back. Agnes, promise me. Ruth's jaw tightened. For a moment, Agnes saw the woman who her friend had been before she took her vows, a battlefield nurse who had held dying men in her arms, who had seen the worst that humanity could offer and still chosen faith over despair. I promise, Ruth said, but I'll be damned if I just sit here waiting for you to die. Agnes smiled a thin, tired smile. Then pray, Ruth. Pray harder than you've ever prayed before. She mounted her horse and rode toward Silver Creek. The town was different in the morning light. Gone were the bustling crowds, the children playing in the streets, the merchants calling out their wares. Silver Creek had become a ghost town overnight. Shutters were closed. Doors were barred. The only sounds were the wind and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Agnes rode down Main Street at a slow walk, her hands resting on her thighs, her eyes scanning the buildings on either side. She could feel the townsfolk watching her from behind curtained windows, watching the nun who had traded her habit for guns, the woman who had transformed into something from legend. A door swung open. Doc Hartley stumbled onto the boardwalk, a bottle in one hand and his medical bag in the other. Jesus Christ, he breathed, staring at her. The shepherd. They said it was true, but I didn't. He shook his head. Agnes McBride, the shepherd of the plains. That was a long time ago, Samuel. Not that long. Hartley's bloodshot eyes traveled over her, the guns, the clothes, the hard set of her jaw. I remember the stories. 50 wagon trains through Comanche territory. Never lost a single soul. They said you could shoot the wings off a fly at 200 yards. They exaggerated. Did they? Hartley took a swig from his bottle. I remember one story in particular, about a woman who faced down 12 raiders single-handed, killed 6 before the rest ran. He met her eyes. That story true? Agnes didn't answer, but something in her expression made Hartley take a step back. Where's Sheriff Cole? She asked. In his office. Been there since dawn, drinking worse than me. Hartley gestured down the street. He knows you're coming. Half the town saw you ride in. Agnes nudged her horse forward. As she passed, Hartley called out, "Mother Agnes." She turned. "For what it's worth, I hope you can save him. The boy, I mean, Daniel." Hartley's face was sad, weary, the face of a man who had seen too much death. "I remember him, you know, before the fire, before Stone found him. He used to come into my office and help me roll bandages. Quiet kid, good heart." He paused. "Stone took that heart and twisted it into something ugly. But maybe it's still in there somewhere." Agnes touched the brim of her hat. "That's what I'm counting on." She rode on. Sheriff Cole was waiting for her on the boardwalk outside his office. He looked worse than yesterday, his eyes red-rimmed, his badge tarnished, his gun belt hanging loose on his hips. The coffee cup in his hand was empty, but Agnes could smell whiskey on his breath from 3 feet away. "Agnes," he nodded at her guns. "I see you found your old friends. I hoped I wouldn't need them. And now I know better." She dismounted, looping her reins around the hitching post. "I'm riding to the Crow's Nest today, before the deadline expires." Cole's face went pale. "That's suicide." "Maybe, maybe not." Agnes stepped onto the boardwalk, bringing herself eye to eye with the old lawman. "I need to ask you something, Marcus. Something about the night of the fire that scarred Daniel. What about it? Was it an accident?" Cole was silent for a long moment. His gaze dropped to the dusty boards beneath his boots. "Marcus, I don't know," he said finally. "I wasn't there. By the time I heard about it, Daniel was gone. Stone had already taken him." He looked up. "But there were rumors, whispers about Stone being in the area that night, about horses going missing from the Morrison Ranch. Horses that were hidden in the barn that burned." "Yes." Agnes felt her stomach clench. "Stone set the fire to cover his horse thieving, and Daniel was sleeping in that barn. I don't know that for certain, but you suspect it." Cole's silence was answer enough. Agnes turned away, staring down the empty street toward the hills that hid the Crow's Nest. Somewhere up there, Daniel was waiting for the town to flee or for the deadline to expire, waiting for the confrontation that both of them had been dreading for 23 years. "I need you to do something for me," Agnes said. "If I'm not back by 3 o'clock, don't try to fight them. Just get everyone out. Take them south to Tucson. Don't look back." "And if you are back," Agnes didn't answer. She climbed onto her horse and rode toward the hills. The trail wound upward through scrubland and rock. Agnes rode slowly, her eyes scanning the landscape for signs of watchers. They were there, she could feel them hidden among the boulders and mesquite. But no one moved to stop her. Not yet. The sun climbed higher. Noon approached. She rounded a bend in the trail and found the first checkpoint. 5 men sat on horseback blocking the path. They were hard-faced and weathered, their guns worn and well-used. The leader, a young man with a fresh scar across his cheek, urged his horse forward. "That's far enough, old woman." Agnes reined in her farm. "I'm here to see Daniel Crow." The young bandit laughed. "Yeah, and I'm here to meet the president. Turn around or—" He stopped. His eyes had dropped to her holsters. "Those are Colt Peacemakers," he said slowly. "Matching pair, ivory handles." He looked up at her face and something flickered in his expression, recognition or maybe fear. "Wait, I'm Mother Agnes McBride," she said calmly. "Some people called me the Shepherd. I'm here to speak with Daniel Crow, alone." The bandits exchanged glances. The young leader's hand drifted toward his gun. Agnes drew, not to shoot, just to demonstrate. One moment her hands were resting on her saddle horn. The next, both Colts were in her hands, hammers cocked, barrels leveled at the 2 bandits closest to her. No one had seen her move. The silence stretched. The young leader's face had gone white. "I'm 63 years old," Agnes said quietly. "My eyes aren't what they used to be and my hands shake a little in the cold, but I can still put a bullet through a man's eye at 50 paces. She tilted her head slightly. "Or I can put one through his hat as a warning. Your choice." The young bandit swallowed hard. "Walk me to Daniel," Agnes said. "Now." The Crow's Nest was impressive. Built into a natural fortress of red rock and sandstone, it was invisible from below, accessible only through a narrow canyon that could be defended by half a dozen men against an army. Inside, the canyon widened into a hidden valley with crude shelters, corrals for horses, and cook fires smoldering beneath overhangs. 30 men watched Agnes ride in, some with curiosity, some with contempt, a few with something that looked almost like respect. She dismounted near the largest shelter, a canvas and wood structure that served as headquarters. The young bandit who had escorted her gestured toward the entrance. He's in there, but what? Stone ain't gonna like this. Stone isn't the one I came to see. Agnes pushed through the canvas flap. The interior was dim lit only by a single lantern hanging from the center pole. Maps covered a makeshift table. Weapons hung on the walls. And in the corner, sitting with his back to the entrance, was a figure in black. He didn't turn around. 23 years, Daniel said. His voice was deeper than she remembered, rougher, worn by time and violence. But beneath it, she could still hear the echo of the boy she had raised. 23 years, she agreed. Silence stretched between them. The lantern flame guttered in a draft. Slowly, Daniel stood. He turned to face her. Agnes felt her breath catch. He was tall, taller than she remembered. His face was lean and weathered with a 3-day growth of stubble and deep lines etched around his eyes. The scar she had heard about twisted down his neck, disappearing beneath the collar of his black shirt, a rope of pale, puckered flesh that made her heart ache with guilt. But his eyes were the same, blue as mountain sky, the eyes of the 8-year-old boy who had tried to steal bread from her wagon, fierce and frightened in equal measure. You got old, Daniel said. So did you. He took a step toward her. His hand rested on the butt of his pistol, not threatening, just ready. You came alone. That was stupid. Probably. I could kill you right now. No one would stop me. Probably. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then why are you here to pray over my soul, to tell me I can still be saved? His voice turned bitter. Spare me the sermon, old woman. I've heard enough preaching to last a lifetime. I didn't come to preach. Then what? Agnes took a breath. This was the moment. 20 years of silence, 20 years of guilt, all leading to this. I came to apologize. Daniel went still. I opened your letter, Agnes continued, the one you sent after the fire, the one I ignored for 20 years. Her voice cracked slightly, but she forced herself to go on. I know about that night. I know you were hurt. I know you waited for me. And I'm sorry. The words came out raw, stripped of all pretense. I thought I was doing God's work in Mexico. I thought you were old enough to take care of yourself. I was wrong. I was a coward, and I abandoned you. For a long moment, Daniel didn't move. His face was unreadable, a mask of stone. Then something flickered in his eyes, something that might have been pain. 20 years, he said quietly. 20 years I waited for that apology. 20 years I told myself you must have had a reason, that you would come back, that you would explain. Daniel, you never came. The words exploded out of him. He swept his arm across the table, sending maps and bottles crashing to the floor. His face contorted with rage, the rage of a wounded child magnified by decades of pain. Do you know what happened after that night? After the fire, he yanked down the collar of his shirt, exposing the full extent of his scars, twisted flesh that ran from his jaw to his shoulder, a map of agony written on his skin. I lay in the dirt for 2 days, dying, praying you would come, and no one came. No one. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know. Daniel's voice broke. You were in Mexico saving souls, doing God's work. While I was burning, while I was screaming your name. Agnes felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Daniel, son, don't call me that. He stepped back, his hand shaking on his pistol. You don't get to call me that. Not anymore, not after what you did. Then what should I call you, the devil's hand? Agnes's voice steadied. Is that who you are now? Is that all that's left of the boy I raised? The boy you raised is dead. No, Agnes took a step forward. He's not. I saw him yesterday, Daniel. On that ridge looking down at the cemetery. I saw him touch his heart. She pointed at his chest. Right there, where the cross is. The cross I made you. Daniel flinched. You still wear it, Agnes said softly. After everything. After all the blood, all the death, all the hate, you still wear the cross I carved for you when you were 10 years old. Why? Daniel's jaw worked. His hand fell away from his pistol. Why, Daniel? Because it's all I have left of her. His voice was barely a whisper now. The woman who found me, who fed me, who taught me that I was worth something. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, just a moment, Agnes saw the boy again. The frightened, angry, desperate boy who had tried to steal bread because he was starving. She's gone. She left. But the cross is still here. Agnes reached out. Her hand trembled as it moved toward his face, the face of the child she had raised, the man she had failed. Daniel pulled back. The mask slammed down again. It doesn't matter, he said coldly. None of it matters. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock, I burn Silver Creek to the ground. You can pray for them if you want. Daniel, take her back to town. He raised his voice and two bandits pushed through the entrance. Don't hurt her, just get her out of my sight. Daniel, please. He turned his back on her. Agnes let them lead her away, but at the entrance she stopped. I won't leave again, she said. Whatever you do tomorrow, whatever you've become, I won't abandon you. Not this time, not ever again. Daniel didn't answer. Agnes walked out into the harsh desert light, and the canvas flap fell closed behind her. He just let you go. Tommy's voice was hushed. He sat pressed against the bars, his face pale in the dying torchlight. Agnes nodded slowly. He could have killed me. Part of him wanted to, I could see it in his eyes. But there was another part, Thomas, a part that remembered, a part that still loved me even after everything. The cross. Yes, the cross. Agnes touched the wooden pendant at her throat, the same design as the one she had made for Daniel all those years ago. Symbols matter, Thomas, not because they have power on their own, but because of what they represent. That cross was a promise I made to Daniel when he was just a boy, a promise that he would always have someone who cared, someone who would never give up on him. But you did give up on him. You left. I did, and that's my sin to carry. But the cross remained, and as long as Daniel wore it, I knew there was still hope. She paused. The question was whether I could reach that hope before Stone destroyed it forever. Tommy frowned. Stone, you keep talking about him. What was his game? Power, Agnes said simply. Stone had spent 23 years turning Daniel into a weapon, a tool for his own ambitions, and I was threatening to take that weapon away. Her eyes darkened. Stone wasn't going to let that happen, not without a fight. Silver Creek, evening of day 3. Agnes rode back into town as the sun was setting. A crowd had gathered in front of the sheriff's office, what remained of the town's population, maybe 40 souls in all. They watched her approach with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Maggie Chen pushed through to the front. Mother Agnes, what happened? What did he say? Agnes dismounted heavily. Her body ached, the ride, the confrontation, the weight of everything that had passed between her and Daniel. He gave us until tomorrow, she said. 3 o'clock, the deadline stands. A ripple of despair moved through the crowd. Someone cursed. A woman began to cry on. That's it. Tom Brennan's voice cut through the murmuring. You're right up there, talk to the devil himself, and all you get is the same deadline we already had. Tom, beige. Ruth pushed forward, her face tight with worry. No. Brennan shook his head. I trusted you, Mother, we all did. But this is madness. We should have run days ago. Now it's too late. Tomorrow they'll come and we'll all die, and for what? Because you thought you could save a monster. He's not a monster. Every head turned. The voice had come from the edge of the crowd, from Doc Hartley, who stood with his medical bag clutched against his chest, his face pale and sweating. What did you say? Brennan demanded. I said he's not a monster. Hartley's voice was shaking, but he pressed on. Daniel Crow was a victim, the same as any of us. Maybe worse. A victim? Brennan laughed bitterly. He's killed dozens of men. He's terrorizing this town. He was a 15-year-old boy who got burned half to death and left to die. Hartley's words cut through the noise like a knife. And do you know who did that to him? Do you know who set that fire? Silence. Hartley looked at Agnes. His eyes were hollow, haunted by secrets he had carried for too long. Tell them, he said. Tell them what you already suspect. Agnes turned to face the crowd. The setting sun painted their faces in shades of gold and crimson, the colors of fire. "The night I left Silver Creek," she said, "a barn burned down outside of town. Daniel was sleeping inside. He barely escaped with his life and his scars." She touched her own neck, remembering the twisted flesh she had seen on Daniel's throat. "His scars will never heal." "Everyone knows about the fire," Brennan said impatiently. "It was an accident. Lightning strike." "No," Agnes's voice hardened. "It wasn't an accident. It was arson. Someone set that fire deliberately to destroy evidence of horse thieving. And Daniel just happened to be inside." The crowd stirred. Confused murmurs rippled through the gathering. "Who?" Maggie Chen asked quietly. "Who would do such a thing?" "His name is Elijah Stone." Agnes let the name hang in the air. "He was a horse thief and a killer passing through the territory that night. He set the fire to cover his tracks. And when Daniel crawled out of the flames half dead and alone, Stone found him." "Found him?" Ruth's face was pale. "You mean Stone took him in, nursed him back to health, made himself into a father figure, the only person in the world who cared whether Daniel lived or died?" Agnes's jaw tightened. "And then Stone spent the next 23 years filling Daniel's head with hate, teaching him that the world was cruel, that trust was weakness, that violence was the only answer." "My God," Father Miguel whispered. "Stone didn't rescue Daniel out of kindness. He saw potential, a broken boy who could be shaped into a weapon Stone could use for his own purposes." Agnes looked around at the frightened faces before her. Everything Daniel has done, every robbery, every killing, every act of terror, it all started with that fire, with Stone's fire, with Stone's lies. Silence settled over the crowd like a shroud. Then Sheriff Cole spoke, his voice rough. "Even if that's true, it doesn't change anything. Daniel is still coming tomorrow. Stone is still with him, and we're still outnumbered 30-1. "No," Agnes shook her head. "It changes everything, because now I know something I didn't know before." "What's that?" Agnes turned to look at the hills toward the hidden valley where Daniel waited, where Stone plotted, where the crow's nest prepared for war. "Daniel doesn't know the truth about that fire," she said. "He thinks it was an accident. He doesn't know that Stone, the man who raised him, the man he trusts, is the one who almost killed him. And if he finds out," Agnes's eyes glittered in the fading light, "then Stone loses his weapon, and Daniel gets a chance to choose who he really wants to be." The crow's nest, night of day 3, the campfire crackled and spat. Daniel sat alone at its edge, his back to the rest of the camp. The wooden cross hung outside his shirt. Now he had pulled it free after Agnes left, and he couldn't bring himself to tuck it away again. 23 years. He turned the words over in his mind the way he had been turning them since she rode away. 23 years, and she still came. She still tried. A shadow fell across the fire. Daniel didn't need to look up to know who it was. "That was quite a performance," Stone said. He settled onto a rock across from Daniel, his sharp face unreadable in the flickering light. The prodigal mother begging forgiveness. Very touching. She wasn't begging. "No," Stone raised an eyebrow. "Then what would you call it?" Daniel didn't answer. He stared into the flames, watching them dance and twist. "I heard what she said," Stone's voice hardened. "About the fire. About waiting for you." He leaned forward. "She's trying to manipulate you, Daniel. That's what women like her do. They use guilt like a weapon sharper than any knife." She apologized. So no one's ever apologized to me before." Daniel finally looked up. His blue eyes reflected the firelight. "Not once, not for anything. Everyone's always taken, and no one's ever given a damn about what they took from me." "I gave a damn." Stone's voice was low and tense. "I found you. Remember, I pulled you out of the ashes. I taught you how to survive. You taught me how to kill. Same thing in this world." Stone stood pacing around the fire. "Listen to me, Daniel. I know what you're thinking. Part of you wants to believe her. Part of you wants to think that the woman who abandoned you somehow deserves your forgiveness." Daniel was silent. "But ask yourself this," Stone continued. "If she cared so much, why did she wait 23 years to come back? Why didn't she open that letter? Why did she choose strangers in Mexico over you?" "I don't know. I'll tell you why, because you weren't important to her. Not as important as her precious mission, her God's work." Stone spat into the fire. "She used you, Daniel, just like everyone uses everyone. And now she's trying to use you again, to use your guilt, your pain to turn you against the only family you've ever had. You're not my family. The words came out before Daniel could stop them. Stone froze. His face went cold. What did you say? You're not my family. Daniel stood facing the older man. You're my partner, my teacher, but family. He touched the cross at his chest. I had one of those once, before me, before everything. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other across the fire. The flames cast shifting shadows across their faces, light and dark flickering back and forth. Then Stone smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. I see, he said, softly. 20 minutes with that woman and suddenly 23 years mean nothing. That's not what I... Save it. Stone held up a hand. I'm not angry, Daniel. I understand. She was your first attachment. Your first love, if you want to call it that. Those bonds are hard to break. He paused. But let me ask you something. What? Tomorrow when we ride into Silver Creek, when we burn their church and their homes and their pathetic little lives to the ground, is she going to try to stop us? Daniel didn't answer. Of course she is. Stone nodded. And when she does, you'll have to make a choice. Her or us. The woman who left you, or the men who fought beside you for a decade. I don't want to hurt her. Then don't. Stone's voice dropped. Kill her quickly. That's mercy in this world. More mercy than she ever showed you. He turned and walked away, leaving Daniel alone with the fire and the night and the weight of everything that was coming. The crow's nest. Later that night, Pete Hollister was 60 years old and tired of killing. He'd been with the crow's nest for 8 years, long enough to know that this life ended only one way. Long enough to have seen friends die in dusty streets, bleeding out on sun-baked earth, while vultures circled overhead. Long enough to know that Daniel Crow wasn't the monster people said he was. Oh, Daniel had done terrible things. They all had. But there was something different about the boss, something that set him apart from Stone and the other hard men who lived by the gun. A hesitation, maybe, a flicker of conscience that Stone had never managed to stamp out completely. Pete had seen it when Daniel let that Morrison boy run instead of shooting him dead. He'd seen it when Daniel refused to burn the schoolhouse on their last raid, even though Stone had wanted to torch the whole town. And he'd seen it today when the old nun rode into camp and walked out again, alive and unharmed. Stone would never have let her leave. Pete pushed himself up from his bedroll and walked through the sleeping camp. He passed the cook fire, the horse corral, the pile of supplies they'd stolen from a dozen towns. Daniel sat alone on a boulder at the edge of camp, staring out at the desert. The moonlight turned his face to silver and shadow. Boss? Daniel didn't turn. Pete, shouldn't you be sleeping? Could say the same to you. Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind. Pete climbed up beside him. His old knees protested, but he ignored them. He'd ignored a lot of aches and pains over the years. What was one more? I've got a granddaughter, you know, Pete said after a moment. Back in Colorado, never met her. Her mama, my daughter, she doesn't want anything to do with me. He paused. Can't say I blame her. Daniel glanced at him. Why are you telling me this? Because I've been thinking about what that old woman said, about second chances. Pete looked up at the stars, thousands of them, scattered across the sky like spilled salt. I'm 60 years old, boss. I've killed more men than I can count. And not a single one of them haunts me as much as the look on my daughter's face the last time I saw her. Daniel was silent. She was 12, Pete continued. I'd been on the run for a year and I stopped by to see her. Just for a night, just to remind myself what I was fighting for. He laughed bitterly. But when she looked at me, when she saw what I'd become, there was nothing there. No love, no hate, just nothing. Like I was already dead to her. Pete, I'm not asking for forgiveness, boss. I'm past that. Pete turned to face Daniel. In the moonlight, his weathered face looked ancient, carved from stone and regret. But that woman who came today, she ain't past anything. She came all this way knowing you could kill her just to say she was sorry. That's not nothing, boss. That's not manipulation or guilt or whatever Stone says it is. That's love. Daniel's jaw tightened. And I think you know it, Pete finished quietly. I think you've known it since she walked through that tent flap and looked at you like you were still the boy she raised. Like all the blood and all the death and all the years between didn't matter. like she still saw something worth saving. There's nothing worth saving. Daniel's voice was harsh. That boy died a long time ago, in a fire. Maybe, Pete shrugged, or maybe he's just been sleeping, waiting for someone to wake him up. He climbed down from the boulder and started back toward camp. Pete, the old outlaw stopped. Why are you telling me this now? Pete looked back over his shoulder. His eyes were sad, knowing the eyes of a man who had nothing left to lose. Because tomorrow you're going to have to choose boss. And I wanted you to know whatever you decide, there's at least one man in this camp who'll understand. He walked away into the darkness, leaving Daniel alone with the stars and the silence and the weight of everything that was coming. Silver Creek, the final day, 2:30 in the afternoon. Agnes stood in the middle of Main Street. She had removed her nun's habit entirely now. She wore the clothes of the shepherd, the woman she had been before the convent, before the vows, before she had tried to bury her violent past beneath prayer and penance. The twin colts rested on her hips. Her hair, silver white, was pulled back beneath her wide-brimmed hat. Her eyes scanned the hills to the north, watching for the dust cloud that would herald the crow's nest's arrival. The town was empty, shutters closed, doors barred. The remaining residents had either fled at dawn or were hiding in cellars and back rooms, praying that Agnes knew what she was doing. She didn't. Not really, but that had never stopped her before. You should have let me come with you. Agnes turned. Ruth stood on the boardwalk, her arms crossed her face, a mixture of fear and stubborn determination. I told you to take the sisters to Tucson. You told me to leave by 3 o'clock if you weren't back. It's not 3 yet. Ruth stepped down into the street, and I'll be damned if I'm going to hide in a cellar while you face them alone. Ruth, don't. Ruth held up a hand. I've followed you for 15 years, Agnes. Through floods and droughts, through sicknesses and raiders, through every hardship this land could throw at us. I followed you because I believed in what we were building. I believed in you. And now I believe in you even more. Ruth's voice cracked slightly. Because you're not just doing this for the town. You're not even doing it for Daniel. You're doing it because it's right. Because someone has to stand up and say no more. And if that someone has to be a 63-year-old nun with 2 guns and more courage than sense, she laughed, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Then I'm damn well going to stand beside her. Agnes stared at her friend. This woman who had questioned her, challenged her, doubted her, and who had never not once abandoned her. If you die, I'll make sure they remember you. Ruth straightened her shoulders. Both of you, the woman you were and the woman you became. I'll tell them about Agnes McBride, who rode into hell to save a soul that everyone else had given up on. Agnes reached out and gripped Ruth's hand. You're a good friend, Ruth Brennan. I know. Ruth squeezed back. Now, how do we do this? 2:45. Dust on the horizon. Agnes stood in the center of the street. Ruth had taken position on the boardwalk behind a water trough, not much cover, but better than nothing. Sheriff Cole watched from his office window, a rifle in his hands. He was too old and too tired to fight, but he had refused to flee. If Silver Creek dies, he had said, I die with it. The dust cloud grew larger. The sound of hoofbeats rolled across the desert like distant thunder. And then they appeared. 30 riders spread across the road in a ragged line, rifles and pistols glinting in the afternoon sun, faces, hard eyes cold, the faces of men who had killed before and would kill again. But something was wrong. Daniel wasn't leading them. Stone was. The older outlaw rode at the front of the pack, his scarred face twisted into a smile. Behind him, the other bandits followed, but their expressions were uncertain, confused. Agnes's hand drifted toward her gun. Where's Daniel? Stone reined in his horse 10 feet away. His smile widened. Daniel is indisposed. He swung down from his saddle boots, thudding on the packed dirt. He's been having second thoughts, entertaining notions of mercy and redemption. Stone spat the last word like a curse. But don't worry, I've relieved him of command. The crow's nest follows me now. That's not how it works, Agnes said. Daniel is weak. Stone cut her off. Always has been. Underneath all that violence, all that hate, there's still that pathetic little boy crying for his mommy. He took a step closer. I spent 23 years trying to burn that weakness out of him, 23-year building him into something useful. And you, he jabbed a finger at her, you waltz in here with your apologies and your crosses and threaten to undo everything. I'm giving him a choice. Exactly. Stone's voice dropped to a hiss. That's the problem. People like Daniel don't get choices. They get instructions. They get purpose. Take that away, and they fall apart. Behind Stone, two bandits dismounted. They were holding someone between them, a figure in a nun's habit, hands bound a gag in her mouth. Sister Catherine, the youngest of the Santa Maria sisters. Agnes's blood ran cold. We found this one trying to sneak out of town, Stone said casually. Thought she might be useful. As leverage. Let her go. Agnes's hand tightened on her pistol. This is between you and me. No. Stone shook his head. It's between you and everyone. That's the problem with people like you, Shepard. You think you can save the world one soul at a time. But the world doesn't work that way. He drew his gun, not pointing it at Agnes, but at Catherine. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices. Sometimes the only way to build something new is to burn the old thing down. Stone, drop your guns. His voice went flat dead. Both of them, on the ground. Now. Agnes looked at Catherine. The young nun's eyes were wide with terror, but she shook her head slightly. Don't do it. Don't give up. But what choice did she have? Agnes unbuckled her gun belt and let it fall to the dirt. Stone smiled. Good. Now, let her go. A new voice, behind Stone, coming from the last place anyone expected. Daniel Crow stepped out from behind the general store, both guns drawn, pointed directly at Stone's back. Daniel! Stone didn't turn, didn't even flinch. I was wondering when you'd show up. Let the nun go, now. Or what, you'll shoot me, Stone laughed. You don't have the nerve. I made you remember I know exactly what you are and what you aren't. You're right. Daniel's voice was quiet, dangerous. You did make me. You found me in the ashes. You nursed me back to health. You taught me everything I know about killing and stealing and surviving. He took a step forward. But there's one thing you never taught me, Stone. One thing you couldn't teach me because you didn't understand it yourself. And what's that? Mercy. Daniel's gun barked. The bullet slammed into Stone's shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped his pistol, clutching at the wound, his face twisted with shock and pain. That was for the fire, Daniel said. He took another step. For 23 years of lies. For making me think the world was as ugly as you are. You, Stone staggered back. You knew. I always knew. Daniel's voice cracked. I found evidence in the ashes. A piece of your saddle blanket with your brand on it. I knew you set that fire, Stone. I knew it was you. Then why? Stone gasped, blood seeping between his fingers. Why did you stay with me? Daniel stopped, his face contorted with pain, not physical, but something deeper, something that had been festering for 23 years. Because I didn't have anyone else. He looked at Agnes. Their eyes met across the dusty street. But I do now. Everything happened at once. Stone lunged for Agnes's fallen guns. Daniel fired, but his aim was off the bullet, kicking up dirt 2 feet to the left. Stone grabbed one of the Colts rolled, came up firing. The bullet caught Agnes in the shoulder. She spun, fell, hit the ground hard. Blood bloomed on her shirt, spreading like a crimson flower. Ruth screamed. Daniel roared something wordless and charged forward, but Stone was already aiming again, his face twisted with hate. A rifle cracked from the sheriff's office. Stone jerked as the bullet tore through his gun hand, sending the Colt flying. Cole. The old ranger still watching from his window, but Stone wasn't done. He scrambled to his feet, snatched a knife from his boot. Nobody move. Daniel stood over Agnes's fallen body, both guns leveled at the crowd. His face was pale, his hands shaking, but his voice carried across the street like thunder. Stone's done. It's over. Anyone who disagrees can take it up with me. Silence. The bandits looked at each other, at Stone bleeding and beaten, at Daniel standing guard over the woman who had raised him. And one by one they backed away. The late afternoon light slanted through the shutters of Doc Hartley's office. Agnes lay on the examining table, her shirt cut away, her shoulder wrapped in bandages. The bullet had passed through, cleanly painful but not fatal. Ruth sat beside her, holding her hand. Daniel stood in the corner, watching. You're lucky, Hartley said, finishing the last knot on the bandage. Half an inch to the left, and it would have hit the artery. You'd have bled out before anyone could help. Lucky, Agnes laughed weakly. That's one word for it. I prefer stubborn. Hartley gathered his instruments. I'll give you some laudanum for the pain. Try to rest. He left, closing the door behind him. Silence settled over the room like dust. Ruth looked at Daniel. Her face was unreadable. You should say something, she told him. She nearly died for you. Ruth, Agnes tried to sit up, but the pain in her shoulder forced her back down. Not now. Yes, now, Ruth's voice was sharp. 23 years, and he finally shows up just in time to watch you get shot. I think he owes you at least an explanation. I owe her more than that. Daniel pushed off from the wall and crossed to the table. Up close, Agnes could see the lines of exhaustion on his face, the weight of everything he carried. I knew about Stone, he said quietly. About the fire. I've known for years. Then why? Because he was all I had. Daniel's voice cracked. You left, and I was alone, and Stone was there. He fed me. He healed me. He made me feel like I mattered, even if it was only as a weapon. Daniel, let me finish. He took a breath. I told myself it didn't matter, that the fire was an accident, that Stone had found me by chance, that what I'd found in the ashes was just coincidence. I buried the truth because the truth was too painful. Because if Stone had set that fire, if he had made me what I am, then everything I'd done was for nothing. Every killing, every robbery, every... He stopped, his face twisted with something that might have been grief. Every sin, Agnes finished softly, committed in service to the man who destroyed you. Daniel nodded. And now I don't know what to do. He sank onto a stool beside the table, his head in his hands. I've spent my whole life following Stone's orders, being what he wanted me to be. And now he gestured vaguely. Now it's over, and I don't know who I am anymore. Agnes reached out, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, and touched his arm. You're Daniel Crow, she said. You're the boy I found stealing bread from my wagon. The boy who was scared and angry and alone, but who still had a heart big enough to love and to be loved. That boy is dead. No, Agnes gripped his arm tighter. He's not. He's just been sleeping, waiting for someone to wake him up. Daniel looked at her. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. How can you forgive me? His voice was barely a whisper. After everything I've done. I don't forgive what you've done, Agnes said. I can't. The blood, the death, the terror, those aren't things anyone can forgive. Those are between you and Mom, and between you and the families of the men you've hurt. But I forgive you. She touched his face, the face of the boy she had raised, the man he had become. The person underneath all that pain, the heart that never stopped beating even when you tried to bury it. Daniel's jaw trembled. As among you're still asking the question, is it too late for me? Then it's never too late. The moment you stop asking is the moment you are truly lost. Agnes smiled through her own tears. But you're still asking, Daniel. You're still fighting. That means there's still hope. Hope, Daniel repeated. The words sounded foreign in his mouth. Fragile, like something that might shatter if held too tightly. Hope. The door creaked open. Ruth straightened her hand, drifting toward the pistol she'd borrowed from Cole. But it wasn't Stone. It was Pete, the old outlaw, his hat in his hands, his weathered face uncertain. Boss, he said, Daniel, Stone's awake. He's asking to see you. Daniel stood slowly. His hand went to the guns at his hips. What does he want? Don't know. Pete shrugged. But he's laughing, and that ain't never a good sign. The sheriff's office, evening. Stone sat in the cell, his wounded shoulder bandaged, his gun hand wrapped in bloody cloth. He should have looked defeated, beaten, but he was smiling. Daniel, his voice was a rasp, come to finish what you started. Daniel stood on the other side of the bars, his face expressionless. I came to see if you had anything to say. Anything to say, eh? Stone laughed, a hollow rattling sound. I have plenty to say, but none of it matters now, does it? He leaned forward. You've made your choice. You've chosen her. The woman who abandoned you. The woman who... She came back. Only when it was convenient. Only when you were useful. No, Daniel shook his head. She came back when she thought I was lost. When everyone else had given up. When the only thing waiting for her was a bullet. He paused. That's not convenience, that's love. Stone's smile faltered. And you, Daniel continued, you found me when I was broken. You made me broken. And then you spent 23 years using my pain to build yourself an army. I made you strong. You made me a weapon. Daniel's voice hardened. But weapons can turn on their masters. And that's exactly what I'm doing. He turned to leave. You think this is over? Stone's voice followed him to the door. You think you can just walk away, start a new life? The Daniel Crow I made the devil's hand. He's still in there. He'll always be in there. And one day, when that old woman is dead and buried, he'll come back. And he'll be hungry. Daniel stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. Maybe, he said quietly, maybe he will. But today, right now, I choose something else. I choose to be the boy she raised, the one who wore the cross, the one who still believed the world could be better. He pulled the door open. Goodbye, Stone. He walked out into the evening light, leaving Stone alone with the shadows and the weight of his own failures. Behind him, Stone's laughter followed, but it was hollow now, empty, the laugh of a man who had finally lost everything. The torch in the corridor had burned low. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to stain the eastern sky. Tommy sat in silence, his face wet with tears he hadn't noticed falling. He chose, he said finally. Daniel chose. Yes, Agnes's voice was gentle. He chose to walk away from everything Stone had made him. He chose to try being something else. But it couldn't have been that easy. Stone was right, wasn't he? The devil's hand, all that violence, all that hate, it doesn't just disappear because you want it to. No, it doesn't. Agnes leaned back, her old bones creaking. Daniel struggled every day, every hour. There were moments when he wanted to go back, when the old habits, the old rage seemed so much easier than trying to be good. She paused. But he kept choosing. Every day, every hour, he kept choosing to be better. And Stone stood trial in Tucson. They hung him 3 months later. Agnes's face was unreadable. I didn't attend. Neither did Daniel. Tommy was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question that had been building since the story began. What happened to Daniel after everything? Agnes smiled, a real smile, this time touched with genuine warmth. That's the last chapter, she said. And we still have a few hours until dawn. She leaned forward, her gray eyes catching the last flickers of torchlight. Let me tell you how it ends. Redemption, Arizona Territory, 1889. The first gray light of dawn crept through the barred window. Tommy Blackwood sat motionless on his cot, his eyes fixed on Agnes's face. The old nun looked tired, bone-tired, the kind of weariness that came from carrying other people's burdens for too long. But her eyes were still bright, still fierce, still burning with the fire that had driven her across the desert to save a lost soul. You said you'd tell me how it ends, Tommy whispered. You said Daniel chose. But choosing ain't the same as winning. Choosing ain't the same as coming back from what he was. No, Agnes folded her hands in her lap. It isn't. Choosing is just the beginning. The hard part comes after, when you have to live with what you've chosen, when you have to prove every single day that the choice meant something. So what happened? After Stone went to jail after Daniel shot him, what then? Agnes was quiet for a moment. Outside, a rooster crowed. The sounds of a town waking up drifted through the stone walls, cartwheels, on packed earth voices calling morning greetings, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. What happened, she said slowly, was the hardest thing Daniel ever had to do. Harder than facing Stone, harder than walking away from the crow's nest. What was it? He had to face himself. Agnes leaned forward. Stone was easy to fight. Stone was an enemy he could see, could shoot, could defeat. But the devil's hand, the monster Stone had created, that enemy lived inside Daniel's own heart. And you can't shoot your way out of that fight. Tommy's hands clenched on the bars. Then how do you win? Agnes smiled, a sad, knowing smile. One day at a time, she said. One choice at a time. One moment of mercy, one act of kindness, one small step toward the light, over and over again, until the darkness starts to fade. She stood, her old joints creaking, and moved to the window. The dawn light caught her face, illuminating the lines and creases of a life hard lived. Let me tell you about the day Daniel Crow died, she said. and the day the boy I raised was finally reborn. Silver Creek, Arizona territory. 1 week after the confrontation, the autumn sun hung low over the desert, painting the adobe buildings of Silver Creek in shades of amber and rose. The town was quiet, not the fearful silence of the occupation, but the peaceful stillness of recovery. Shutters stood open, children played in the streets. The scent of baking bread drifted from the Chen bakery. Agnes sat on the porch of Doc Hartley's office, her arm in a sling, watching the town come back to life. Her shoulder still ached, would probably ache for the rest of her days, but the wound was healing. Hartley said she'd been lucky. She knew it was something more than luck. Ruth sat beside her, mending a torn habit with quick, precise stitches. "You should be resting," Ruth said without looking up. "I've rested enough." Agnes shifted on the wooden bench, wincing as the movement pulled at her bandages. "Besides, I wanted to see this." "See what?" Agnes nodded toward the far end of Main Street. Daniel Crow was walking toward them. He looked different. The black clothes were gone, replaced by a plain cotton shirt and worn dungarees. The gun belt at his hip held a single pistol, now a working tool, not a weapon of terror. His hair had been cut short and his jaw was clean-shaven for the first time in years. But the biggest change was in his eyes. The cold, dead look that had haunted them for so long was gone. In its place was something uncertain, vulnerable, the eyes of a man who didn't quite know who he was anymore. Ruth's hand drifted toward the pistol at her own hip. She'd taken to wearing one since the confrontation, and Agnes suspected she'd never stop. "Easy," Agnes murmured. "He's not here to fight." Daniel stopped at the foot of the porch steps. For a long moment, he just stood there looking at Agnes. His jaw worked, but no words came out. "You look better," Agnes said finally. "I feel—" Daniel paused, searching for the right word. "Empty, like there's a hole where something used to be." The rage, the certainty. He climbed the steps and sat on the railing across from her, keeping a respectful distance. "For 23 years, I knew exactly who I was, what I wanted, what I was supposed to do. Stone told me, and I believed him." He laughed bitterly. "Now Stone's in a cell in Tucson waiting to hang, and I don't know anything anymore. That's a good sign." "Doesn't feel good." "It wouldn't." Agnes reached out with her good hand and touched his arm. She blinked them away. "You already are," she said. "You made a choice, Daniel. When it mattered most, when everything Stone had built was pressing down on you, you chose mercy over violence. Forgiveness over hate." She squeezed his arm. "That's not nothing. That's everything. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does." Agnes smiled. "That's how you know you're on the right path. The people who think they've done enough, who think they've earned their redemption, those are the ones who've stopped growing. The ones who keep asking, is it enough? They're the ones who never stop trying to be better." Ruth cleared her throat. They both turned to look at her. "Sheriff Cole is looking for you," she said to Daniel. Her voice neutral but not unfriendly. "Says he has something to discuss." Daniel nodded and stood. He paused at the top of the steps, looking back at Agnes. "Thank you," he said, "for not giving up on me." "I never will." Agnes's voice was steady. "No matter what. I'm your mother, Daniel. Maybe not by blood, but by choice. And that's a bond that can't be broken." Daniel's jaw trembled. For a moment, he looked like he might cry. Then he straightened his shoulders, nodded once, and walked away. Ruth watched him go, her expression unreadable. "You really believe he can change?" she asked quietly. "After everything?" Agnes leaned back on the bench, ignoring the pain in her shoulder. "I believe he already has," she said. "The question isn't whether he can change. The question is whether he can keep changing every day, every hour, for the rest of his life. And if he can't, then I'll be there to catch him when he falls." Agnes closed her eyes, letting the autumn sun warm her face. "That's what shepherds do, Ruth. We don't just guide the flock. We carry the ones who can't walk on their own." Ruth was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I think I understand now," she said. "Why you do what you do. Why you never give up." "Oh, it's not about winning." Ruth set down her mending and looked at Agnes. "It's not about saving every soul or fixing every broken thing. It's about the trying, the reaching out even when you know you might fail." Agnes opened her eyes and smiled. "Now you're getting it." Sheriff's office. The same afternoon, Sheriff Marcus Cole sat behind his desk, a tin star in his hands. He turned it over and over, catching the light from the window. Daniel stood across from him, waiting. "I'm too old for this," Cole said finally. "Too old, too tired, and too damn slow. Should have retired years ago, but there was never anyone to take over." He looked up at Daniel. "Still isn't really, but you're the closest thing I've got." "You want me to be your deputy?" Daniel's voice was flat. "A killer, an outlaw, working for the law. I want you to be something other than what you were." Cole set the star on the desk between them. "Look, Crow Daniel, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen a lot of bad men. Some were born that way. Most were made by circumstance, by desperation, by the people who should have helped them and didn't." He leaned forward. "You were made, Daniel. Stone made you. But that doesn't mean you have to stay what he made. Every day you wake up and don't kill someone, you're proving him wrong. Every time you help instead of hurt, you're undoing what he did. The people of this town will never accept me." "Some won't, that's true." Cole shrugged, awed. "But some will. The ones who matter, the ones who understand that a man isn't defined by his worst moments, but by what he does after them." Daniel stared at the star. It was small, tarnished, unremarkable, just a piece of tin stamped into a shape. But it represented something, something he had spent 23 years destroying. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you trust me with this?" Cole leaned back in his chair. "I don't trust you," he said bluntly. "Not yet, maybe not ever, but I trust Agnes. I trust the woman who rode into the crow's nest alone to save your sorry soul. If she believes in you after everything you've done to her, to this town, then maybe there's something worth believing in." He pushed the star across the desk. "Take it or leave it, but if you take it, you're making a promise. To me, to this town, to yourself. You're saying that the devil's hand is dead and something new is taking his place." Daniel reached out. His fingers brushed the cool metal. "The woman who never gave up on me, who rode into hell just to say she was sorry." He picked up the star. "One condition," he said. "Name it. The men from the crow's nest, the ones who want to start over, I want to help them. Find them work. Give them a chance." Daniel met Cole's eyes. "If I can change, so can they. Some of them, anyway." Cole studied him for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. "Fair enough. But they answer to me, not to you. One wrong move and they're gone." "Agreed on." Cole stood and extended his hand. Daniel took it. "Welcome to the law, Deputy Crow." A ghost of a smile crossed Cole's weathered face. "God help us all." Santa Maria Mission. 1 week later, the convent looked different in the evening light. Agnes sat on the porch of the main building, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of fire and gold. Her shoulder had healed enough that she no longer needed the sling, though Hartley had warned her not to push it. She wasn't pushing anything. For the first time in weeks, she was simply resting, breathing, being. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the road. Daniel rode up the hill on a borrowed horse, a dappled mare that reminded Agnes of the one she'd ridden in her shepherd days. He dismounted, tied the reins to the hitching post, and climbed the porch steps. "Mother Agnes." "Daniel." She gestured to the chair beside her. "Sit." He sat. For a while, they just watched the sunset together, neither speaking. The silence was comfortable now, the silence of two people who had said everything that needed saying and were content to simply exist in each other's presence. "Cole tells me you've been doing good work," Agnes said finally. "I'm trying." Daniel's voice was quiet. "Broke up a fight at the saloon yesterday. Helped the Morrison family fix their fence. Small things. Small things add up. I hope so." He turned to look at her. "I still don't know if I deserve any of this. The badge, the second chance, He trailed off. "The forgiveness." "Yeah." Agnes reached over and took his hand. His fingers were calloused, scarred, the hands of a man who had done terrible things. But they were also the hands of the boy who had helped her roll bandages, who had learned to carve wood at her knee, who had worn the cross she made him for 30 years. "Deserving isn't the point," she said. "None of us deserve the grace we're given. That's what makes it grace." "Then what is the point?" "Living like you deserve it." Agnes squeezed his hand. "Not because you've earned it, but because someone believed in you enough to offer it. And you honor that belief by becoming the person they saw in you." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was thick. I don't know if I can be what you want me to be. I don't want you to be anything. Agnes smiled. I just want you to be you, the real you, the one that was always there underneath all the pain and the rage and the hate. She pointed to the cross on his chest. That boy, the one who never stopped believing even when the world gave him every reason to give up. That's who you are, Daniel. That's who you've always been. Daniel looked down at the cross. His jaw trembled. I love you, he said. The words came out rough, uncertain, as if he'd never said them before. Perhaps he hadn't not since he was 15 years old. I love you too, son. Agnes's eyes glistened. I always have. I always will. They sat together as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to appear one by one, scattered across the vast desert sky. Redemption, Arizona territory. Dawn. The first rays of sunlight streamed through the barred window, warm and golden. Tommy Blackwood sat on the edge of his cot, tears streaming down his face. He hadn't noticed when he'd started crying somewhere in the middle of the story, when Daniel chose mercy over revenge, when Agnes spoke of grace unearned. So that's it. His voice was hoarse. Daniel became a deputy, Stone went to hang, and everyone lived happily ever after. Happily ever after, Agnes shook her head. No, life doesn't work that way. Daniel struggled every day. There were times he wanted to go back when the old rage would rise up and he'd have to fight it down. There were people who never forgave him, who saw the badge on his chest and only remembered the devil's hand. But he kept going. He kept going. Agnes stood, her old bones creaking. 2 years now. He's still the deputy of Silver Creek, still wearing the star, still trying to be better than he was. She paused. Sheriff Cole retired last month. Daniel's the sheriff now. Tommy's eyes widened. The devil's hand, a sheriff. The boy I raised, a protector. Agnes moved to the cell door. That's the story, Thomas. Not of a man who was saved, but of a man who chose to save himself one day at a time, one decision at a time. Outside, the sounds of the town had grown louder. Footsteps in the corridor, voices murmuring, the jingle of keys. Tommy's face went pale. It's time, he whispered. They're coming for me. Yes, Agnes gripped the bars. They are. I'm going to die. Maybe. Agnes's voice was steady. The governor might pardon you, he might not. But Thomas, she reached through the bars and took his hand. Whatever happens in the next hour, you have a choice. The same choice Daniel had. The same choice we all have. What choice? You can walk to that scaffold as the man you were, the thief, the outlaw, the boy who made mistakes. Or you can walk there as the man you want to be, someone who faced death with dignity, who accepted responsibility, who died without hate in his heart. Tommy's hand shook in hers. I'm scared, he admitted. Of course you are. Fear is human. Fear is honest. Agnes squeezed his fingers. But courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. The door at the end of the corridor swung open. A deputy appeared, keys in hand. Time, Mother Agnes. She nodded but didn't release Tommy's hand. Remember what I told you, she said. No matter what happens in the next few minutes, no matter how this ends, you are not beyond hope. You are not beyond love. You are not beyond grace. How do you know? Agnes smiled the same sad, knowing smile she'd worn all night. Because if Daniel Crow could find his way back from the darkness, then so can you. So can anyone. She released his hand and stepped back as the deputy unlocked the cell. Tommy stood on shaking legs. He looked at Agnes, at this old woman who had spent all night telling him a story about redemption, about second chances, about the power of love to transform even the darkest soul. Thank you, he said, for not giving up on me. I never will. Agnes touched the cross at her throat. Now go, Thomas. Go and show them who you really are. Redemption Town Square. Sunrise. The scaffold stood in the center of the square, rough-hewn timber and a length of rope. A crowd had gathered, not large, but solemn. Shopkeepers, ranchers, a few children, brought by parents who believed in learning lessons early. Agnes stood at the edge of the crowd, her hands clasped before her. Tommy climbed the steps with the deputy at his side. His legs were steadier, now his face calm. Whatever fear he felt, he was keeping it locked inside. The hangman, a grim-faced man in a leather apron, stepped forward with the noose, and then hoofbeats, fast and urgent, growing louder. Every head turned. A rider appeared at the end of Main Street, pushing his horse hard. He was waving something in his hand, a piece of paper white against the morning light. "Stop!" the rider shouted. "Stop the execution!" The hangman paused, noose in hand. The crowd murmured. The rider slid from his horse before it had fully stopped, stumbling up the steps to the sheriff's office. He thrust the paper at the deputy. "Governor's pardon," he gasped. "Just came through. The sentence is commuted to 15 years imprisonment." Silence. Then a woman in the crowd began to weep. Others followed, some with relief, some with disappointment. Tommy stood frozen on the scaffold, his face blank with shock. Agnes closed her eyes. "Thank you," she prayed silently. "Thank you for giving him another chance." But even as she prayed, a small smile tugged at her lips. "Though I suppose I should also thank his lawyer. That man works miracles." The deputy removed the noose from Tommy's neck and let him down from the scaffold. As they passed Agnes, Tommy stopped. "You knew," he said quietly, "and didn't you, I hoped?" Agnes touched his cheek. "I always hope. What happens now? Now you go to prison, you serve your time, and when you get out," she pulled something from her pocket and pressed it into his hand. "You come find me. There's work to be done." Tommy looked down. In his palm was a small wooden cross freshly carved. "I can't take this," he whispered. "You can, and you will." Agnes folded his fingers around it. "It's a reminder, Thomas. A reminder that no matter how dark things get, no matter how far you fall, there's always someone waiting to help you back up." Tommy's eyes filled with tears. "I don't deserve—" "None of us do." Agnes stepped back. "Now go. Serve your time. Become the man I know you can be." She watched as the deputy led Tommy away. He looked back once the cross clutched in his bound hands and nodded. Then he was gone. Santa Maria Mission. 1 year later, 1890. The schoolhouse was full again. Agnes stood at the front of the small room, chalk in hand, writing letters on the board. Behind her, a dozen children sat at wooden desks, orphans and abandoned children the mission had taken in over the past year. Their faces were eager, attentive, hungry for knowledge. "A is for apple," Agnes said, sketching the shape. "B is for book. C is for—" The door creaked open. Agnes turned. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the afternoon light. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a sheriff's star on his chest. "Daniel," Agnes smiled. "You're early." "Couldn't wait." Daniel stepped into the room, removing his hat. The children watched him with wide eyes. They knew who he was, knew the stories, but they also knew how hard he'd worked to become something different. "Besides, you have visitors." He stepped aside. Two figures appeared in the doorway. The first was Tommy Blackwood, older now. His face weathered by a year of hard labor, but his eyes were clear and calm. The second was a child, a boy of perhaps 8 years old with dark hair and darker eyes, wearing clothes too big for his thin frame. Agnes set down her chalk. "Tommy." She crossed the room and took his hands. "You came. You told me to." Tommy's voice was steady. "When I got out, you said there was work to be done. So here I am." "And who is this?" Tommy looked down at the boy beside him. The child stared at the floor, his shoulders hunched, his hands clenched into fists. "Found him on the road outside Tucson," Tommy said quietly. "Living in a ditch, stealing scraps from travelers. Nobody wanted him. Nobody cared." He paused. "Reminded me of someone." Agnes knelt before the child, bringing herself to his eye level. "What's your name, child?" The boy didn't answer. His jaw was set, his eyes defiant, but beneath the defiance, Agnes could see the fear, the loneliness, the desperate hunger for someone to care. Just like Daniel, just like Tommy, just like all the lost children who had ever crossed her path. "I don't need anyone's pity," the boy said. His voice was rough, scratchy, as if he hadn't spoken in days. Agnes smiled. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of joy, of recognition, of endless, bottomless love. "I'm not offering pity," she said gently. "I'm asking your name." The boy blinked. Some of the defiance faded from his face. "Jacob," he whispered. "My name's Jacob." Agnes reached out and took his hand. His fingers were thin, cold, trembling. "Welcome home, Jacob." She stood and led him into the schoolroom, toward the empty desk in the front row. The other children watched, curious but accepting. They had all been where he was once. They understood. Daniel and Tommy stood in the doorway watching. "You really think she can save them all?" Tommy asked quietly. Daniel touched the cross at his chest, the same cross Agnes had carved for him 30 years ago, worn and weathered but still whole. "No," he said. "She can't save them all. Nobody can." "Then why does she keep trying?" Daniel watched as Agnes knelt beside the new boy, speaking softly, her hand on his shoulder. Jacob's rigid posture slowly relaxed. The fear in his eyes began to fade. "Because that's what shepherds do," Daniel said. "They don't give up on the lost sheep. They keep searching, keep reaching, keep hoping no matter how many times they fail." He turned to Tommy. "And sometimes," he added quietly, "sometimes they succeed." Santa Maria Mission. Evening. The children had gone to bed. The mission was quiet, peaceful, filled with the gentle sounds of the desert night, crickets chirping, an owl hooting in the distance, the whisper of wind through the mesquite. Agnes sat on the porch watching the stars. Daniel sat beside her, hat in his lap. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. After everything they had been through, silence was his own kind of conversation. Finally, Agnes broke the quiet. "Do you remember what you asked me?" she said. "That first day when you were just a boy, when I caught you stealing bread from my wagon." Daniel smiled. "I asked why you were helping me. And I said, because 20 years ago, someone did the same for you." Daniel turned to look at her. "I never asked who that was. Does it matter?" "I suppose not." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "But I've been thinking about it. About the chain. Someone saved you. You saved me. I saved—" He gestured toward the mission, toward the children sleeping inside. "Who knows how many people those children will save someday?" Agnes nodded slowly. "That's the point, Daniel. That's the whole point." She reached over and took his hand. "We can't save the world. We can't fix everything that's broken. But we can save one person. And that person can save another. And another. And another. Until the darkness fades. Until the darkness fades." Agnes squeezed his hand. "That's what grace is, son. Not a single act of forgiveness, but a chain stretching backward through everyone who ever showed us mercy and forward through everyone we'll ever help." Daniel looked up at the stars, millions of them, scattered across the infinite sky. "Do you think it's enough?" he asked. "Everything we've done, everything we're doing, do you think it makes a difference?" Agnes was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'll never know, not in this life. But I keep trying anyway, because trying is all we can do." She stood, her old bones protesting, and looked out at the desert, at the vast empty landscape that had been her home for 30 years. Somewhere out there, more lost souls wandered. More broken children cried in the darkness. More people made terrible choices and wondered if they could ever be forgiven. "People ask me how I know which souls can be saved," Agnes said quietly. "The answer is I don't. I never know, but I keep trying, one soul at a time, until my last breath." She turned and walked toward the door of the mission. "Because that's what a shepherd does," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet night. "Never abandon the lost sheep." She paused at the threshold and looked back at Daniel, at the boy she had found, the man she had almost lost, the son who had finally come home. "Never," she said, and she smiled. "Some stories have happy endings, some have sad ones, and some, the truest ones, just have endings. Moments where the journey pauses but never really stops." Daniel Crow is still the sheriff of Silver Creek. He's made mistakes since then, plenty of them. But he keeps trying. Every day he puts on that badge and tries to be better than he was the day before. Tommy Blackwood works at the mission now, helping with the children. He found Jacob, and Jacob found us, and the chain continues stretching forward into a future none of us will ever see. And me, I'm still here, still watching, still waiting for the next lost soul to wander through my door. Because that's the thing about shepherds, you see. We don't retire. We don't give up. We don't decide that we've saved enough people and it's time to rest. We keep going until the end, until our last breath, until the last sheep is home. Always.